the home farm of Eric C. Robinson, Inc., my family's sixth generation farming operation on the central south shore of Prince Edward Island. My name is Lori Robinson, and I am the farm manager at my family's owned and managed ag businesses that started here in 1810. I was hoping to be able to show off our soybean harvest in the background, but unfortunately, Mother Nature had other ideas today, as it's a bit too damp to continue on with our fall harvest. When Iris reached out to me back in March to see if I would present at this year's Ag Women's Conference, I had to admit to her that I had always wanted to attend the conference, but could never make the schedule fit. In the fall, I was always busy with harvest, and in March, I was often coaching curling at the Under-18 Canadian Championship, or in 2019, I was in Red Deer at the Canada Games. I also had to admit to her that I was walking my then 4-month-old chocolate lab Juno during the call, and that if I seemed distracted or said sit or stay, not to be alarmed. She offered to call back at a more convenient time, but I suggested that as a farm manager, I had gotten pretty good at multitasking over the years. In the end, she asked me to talk about the challenges and opportunities I saw being a female farmer in Prince Edward Island, and to share some of my experiences in my 28-year career in agriculture. So here we go. The Robinson family businesses, as it exists today, is quite different from its humble beginnings in the 1800s. My grandfather Eric, for whom our company is named, took over his father's 100-acre farm that you can see here over my shoulder, and over time, with the help of his wife Edith and their 2 sons, John and Alan, expanded the farm to be 3,000 acres and added several other agricultural endeavors, including a produce and crop protectants dealership, a machinery dealership, and a fertilizer business. Today, the company is owned by Eric's 6 grandchildren and is managed by the 3 youngest. I manage the day-to-day operations of our now 2,500-acre farm, which grows soybeans, barley, and forages, and rents out some of our remaining lands for potato and corn production. Up until 3 years ago, the farm also grew their own potatoes in both the seed and table categories, and had a potato packing shed that supplied potato seed all over North America and sold a large percentage of its table potatoes to Loblaws in bags that had a picture of me standing on the back of a potato truck during harvest. My brother Andrew manages our fertilizer, crop protection, and seed business, the PEI Agrimart, which we purchased in 1999. And is part of the Agrimart system, which is very familiar to people from Ontario. My cousin Mary, whom some of you will recognize as the current president and first female president of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. She manages Island Lime, a custom lime spreading operation that we also purchased in 1999. During the busy planting season in May and June, which we often dub the crazy season, the 3 divisions employed upwards of 90 local people. Up until the current generation of Robinson owners and managers, all of the family's businesses were managed by men. In fact, it was highly anticipated that my brother Andrew, who was just 10.5 months younger than me, would one day take over our dad's role as farmer or farm manager. As fate would have it, he declared to my family that he was not interested in being a farmer sometime in the mid-80s, just about the time I was getting ready to start my final year in high school. A few weeks later, I announced to my folks that I wanted to run the farm, even though I didn't know a single farm on PEI being run solely by a female. There were no examples for me to look to. There were no female mentors for me to ask questions of, but that did not deter me. Thankfully, my folks did not try to dissuade me. In fact, they encouraged me as long as it was what I truly wanted to do. My high school guidance counselor felt somewhat differently. He questioned why I would waste my top 5 academic standing in grade 12 to become a farmer. The teenager in me at the time was not sure how to respond to that, but today I would say, wouldn't you want the smartest people you know producing the food that you and your family eat? I often think that my brother's decision not to become a farmer was a pivotal point in my decision to do exactly that. But when I suggest that very thing to my mom, she reminds me that during my 4th Christmas, after I had finished playing with all of my toys and had put them away, I took my sister's Barbies and I put them in the seats of all of the tractors that my brother had received for Christmas and drove them all over the house. So apparently, somehow, in the early 1970s, I was already plotting my plan to be a girl farmer. Choosing a career as a female farmer with few role models to look for guidance or advice was not the first time in my life that I experienced a challenging situation with so few examples to draw on. In February of 1980, at the age of 11, I was diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic, a lifelong chronic disease that requires close attention 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, without fail. At that time, I did not know another person living with the disease, and it would be another 7 years before I met another person my age with the same condition. It was quite a shock to my entire family. None of us were equipped to deal with what living with diabetes was all about. My parents were told that on average, a young person diagnosed with diabetes would live approximately 2/3 as long as a healthy person. At the time, that meant I would probably not live past the age of 50. Thankfully, due to research, education, and close attention, those stats have dramatically improved. But in the beginning, I decided that it was up to me and up to me alone to beat the odds. I think my independent, strong-willed, fierce self kicked into high gear that day. If I could face the challenge of living with a chronic disease for the rest of my life at the age of 11, I could tackle most things that came up in my life. After high school, I eventually found my way to the University of Guelph, where in 1991 I graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture and majored in agricultural business. I knew that I could return home and start in our family business following graduation, but I wanted to prove to myself that I could work in the agricultural sector without relying on a ready-made job at home. I worked in research at the University of Guelph's Crop Science Department before making my way back to PEI in February of 1994. With only 3 months of working side by side with my dad, and on our very first day of potato planting, my dad was killed in a tragic car accident on his way to a medical appointment. Suddenly, my siblings and I owned half of a large agricultural company with our dad's brother, our uncle, and I was plunged into a business I knew very little about. Thankfully, with the support of dedicated, hard-working employees, all of the farm's crops got planted that spring, and I started on my long, uphill journey into farm management, a job I still hold today, 27 years later, so I guess I did okay. Life as a female farmer on PEI has come with lots of barriers, not unlike the barriers I hear about from women involved in ag all across Canada. Many of these same barriers exist across the globe. Last year, I had the opportunity to take part in a research project in which a Scottish PhD student was comparing the barriers women face in agriculture in island communities, mainly focusing on the comparison between PEI and Scotland. As part of the study, I had to look back over the span of my career and think about how things have changed from my early days to where things are today. In the early stages, I was one of a very small number of women in the room at PEI farmer meetings. Most of the other women in the room were government employees or researchers. I quickly became known as that girl farmer. I found myself the subject of news articles and magazine articles, each interviewer wanting to focus on the fact that I was a female farmer in an industry full of men. I asked one of the writers if they could just refer to me as a farmer and not focus so much on my gender. Her response left me with a new appreciation for what my future role in agriculture could be. She looked at me and said, "Lori, I want to highlight that you are a female because you are a role model for young girls out there that may want to follow in your footsteps." From that point on, I took a more active role in the promotion of women in agriculture. I joined the PEI Crop Insurance Board as the first ever woman producer and eventually became the first ever female chair of the same board. I spent time going into schools and talking to grade 6 students, mainly in the city schools, about farming. They were especially excited about the fact that I could drive a tractor, and all hoped that I had brought my tractor with me that day. Through fellow female farmers in Nova Scotia, I joined a Facebook group called the Ag Women's Network, the Maritime Ag Women's Network, a platform for women involved in agriculture that encouraged participants to network, share ideas, share frustrations, etc. I was part of a focus group of women farmers on PEI that was investigating ways to get more women involved in leadership roles in agriculture, which actually led me to being asked to speak at this conference today. In 2019, I applied and won the first PEI recipient of the federal government's Women's Entrepreneur Fund, which provided up to $100,000 of funding for a project undertaken by a Canadian company which was more than 50% owned, more than 50% managed, and dealt with products in the global market. The all-woman company that we hired to help us with the application actually made me sound like quite the rock star. More recently, I joined the board of Farmers Helping Farmers, a PEI NGO that helps Kenyan farm families to produce enough food for their families and to educate their children. One of the current projects that I'm most interested in is one that focuses on empowering Kenyan women farmers by teaching them how to grow not just more food, but more nutritious food in a very harsh environment. It's easy to see from this extensive list that although there are many barriers for women in ag, there are also many great opportunities. In fact, some of these barriers have led to some wonderful book titles if I ever decided to write a book about my life. I've already mentioned that I was always considered that girl farmer. I also had an experience where someone said to me, "You should have been a boy." But my favorite story, and the one I would lean towards the most, came as a result of a grain buyer making a cold call to our farm one day. He asked to speak with the farm manager. When I came down the hall to greet him, he looked me up and down when I told him that I was the farm manager, and in my head I was thinking, strike one. He proceeded to ask me a bunch of questions about what crops we grew and how many acres of each. After answering all of his questions, he said that he would need to speak to the person that made the decisions about crop marketing. And once again in my head, I was thinking, strike two. When I explained that that person was me, he asked a series of more questions and then asked to speak with Mr. Robinson. I told him that I was the Mr. Robinson he was looking for, and that unfortunately, I didn't think we would be doing any business in the future, strike three, and we never have. My sister insists that if I was ever to write a book, that I should entitle it, "I Am the Mr. Robinson You Are Looking For," and perhaps one day I will. Do I think things have improved as a woman in agriculture since my start in the industry almost 3 decades ago? Definitely. But unfortunately, there's still a long way to go. Social media has certainly created a platform to tell our stories and show examples of women farmers. Groups like the Maritime Ag Women's Network and this conference are excellent ways to network, speak with like-minded individuals, and get some great ideas. But we'll have to continue to push forward to ensure that our voices are heard and that our stories are told. So how do we know when we've achieved success? A great question. When I was filling out my speaker information form for IRIS, in the section about getting to know your speaker, I only left one question blank, although I think I had the option to leave 2 or 3. And that question was, what does success look like to you? I actually had no idea. But just last week, I took part in the PEI Business Women's Symposium. The keynote address was given by Jill Heinerth, Canada's first underwater cave explorer. I mean, really, how cool does that job sound? Her presentation was both powerful and inspirational. She talked about wanting to be a diver from a very young age, but could find few examples of women doing that. In dive school, one of her instructors told her that she would never make it in that career as a female. Now, doesn't that sound familiar? Boy, did she prove them wrong. More people have walked on the moon than have visited many of the places that Jill has seen on Earth. If you get a chance to check her out on the internet, I would highly recommend it. In the Q&A session afterwards, someone asked her when she knew that she had reached success. Her answer really resonated with me. She said that she knew she had reached success when she became the mentor that she wished she had seen at 10 years old. What a great answer. If only I had thought of that when I was asked the question on the form. As I come to the end of my presentation, I'd like to wrap up with 3 things I've learned in my life so far. And I stress so far because I'm neither done learning nor am I done living. Much in disagreement with what the doctors told my parents back in the 1980s. So number 1, surround yourself with good people. You are going to need them in good times and bad. You want to have people around you to celebrate your successes, but you also want people around to help when life gets really challenging. Number 2, don't let gender bias stand in the way of reaching your goals. As a female, if you don't see examples of what you want to become in life, do it anyway and become the example for future generations. And finally, number 3, the best piece of advice I ever received from my dad. No matter what your position is in a company, no job is too small. He would often say to me, Lori, you don't get respect by being, you get respect by doing. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm sure that my now 11-month-old chocolate lab will be grateful that she doesn't have to hear me practice my presentation on our daily 6-kilometer walks, and that she will finally get my undivided attention.